Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm glad to have you here to find out what else I saw in June that I didn't already talk about. Let's dive right in with movie number 1, 2022's Ticket to Paradise, a romantic comedy that reunites George Clooney and Julia Roberts as a divorced couple who can't stand each other's company. But when their newly graduated daughter comes down with a case of insta-love while on vacation in Bali and announces she's getting married, they join forces to stop the wedding. This story is fairly predictable, but it still manages to include a couple surprises, and while the bickering can get annoying, it's still a reasonably fun film. Roberts and Clooney certainly had fun making it. Actually, the part that scored the biggest laughs from my mom and me was the blooper reel that played over the end credits. The movie doubles as a tourism ad. I'm not sure it was actually filmed in Bali or somewhere else, but the people are welcoming and cheerful, and obviously the scenery is gorgeous. I remember thinking the trailer for this had a certain charm that made it appealing even for someone who is not necessarily a rom-com fan. I'm not sure it delivered all that I was hoping for. It wasn't uproariously funny, but it had its moments. I am having trouble remembering the title. I keep wanting to call it Trapped in Paradise or Trouble in Paradise. Those are also comedies that I have seen, but they're very different. Movie number 2 is 1942's Lady from Chungking, a war film set in occupied China. Anna May Wong stars as a resistance leader who directs a group of oppressed rice paddy workers in a plot against a Japanese general. We ended up watching this on Prime. The quality of the print is not great, but none of the uploads on YouTube seem to be much better, so Prime is what we went with. I felt it was the best of the available options. It's too bad because this is a unique film. It's not great, it's too short, and it seems to be lacking a few significant details. We weren't sure what year this was supposed to be, or whether we were meant to recognize Wong's identity. There's also some choppy editing that makes an otherwise straightforward narrative seem disjointed. But it's an interesting piece, with a dangerous undercover scenario that places the protagonist in a moral bind. To all the people out there who like to talk through their hats and make it very clear that they have no idea what they're talking about, who think that women being strong, independent characters in films is a relatively new concept, and that women just played subdued, servile roles in black and white films, here you go. Here's a great example to prove you wrong. Anna May Wong's character is smart and courageous and strong. She coordinates the fight. She stands by her convictions. She kills when it's necessary, and she earns the respect of allies and enemies alike. Co-starring is Mae Clarke, playing a half-American, half-Russian singer who entertains Japanese officers. Hers is also a strong, independent character. Movie number 3 is 1950's Woman on the Run, a noirish thriller set in San Francisco in which a man walking his dog witnesses a murder. The police try to take him into protective custody so he can testify against the killer once they catch him, but he runs away. Ann Sheridan stars as his disinterested wife, who, despite their estrangement, is equally resistant to helping the police trap her husband. I feel like that was confusing. Trust me, it's not as unclear in the film as I just made it sound. This film, directed by Norman Foster, has a fresh feel, transforming even mundane spaces into creative sets. Sheridan's deadpan expression is perfect for her dry character, whose apathetic outlook softens as she does her own investigating. She partners up with Dennis O'Keefe's newspaperman, who decides her story has a compelling angle, and together they dodge Robert Keith's sharp-witted policeman. There's some great dialogue, the detective and the housewife having some particularly snappy exchanges. And what takes this film to the next level is first its twist, and second its final act. I won't talk about either, but I can tell you things get very exciting. Lots of suspense, some great photography, and a thrilling bit on a roller coaster. Movie number 4 is 1977's MacArthur. This Joseph Sargent-directed biopic stars Gregory Peck as the Supreme Allied Commander, General Douglas MacArthur. MacArthur is a divisive figure for some, and at the outset I had the impression the film was going to lean on that. but I think it's more or less a favorable portrait. Gregory Peck plays him as a noble, heroic, likable man, which is funny because when he first was cast, Peck didn't like MacArthur, but as he learned more and came to understand what he was up against and what he sought to achieve, he evaluated him differently and had greater appreciation. Opposition from the anti-MacArthur crowd is present, but the jibes made about him are mostly petty, snarky little comments from egotistical politicians and officers with their own agenda who dislike his cult of personality. How an individual responds to the film today is going to differ based on personal views. It has an interesting relevancy in a few aspects, such as his ardent dislike of communists and his rigid stance against appeasement. It was controversial then, and what do you know, it's still a hot-button issue in 2023. I didn't love all of the film's choices, but I did like it. It does expect you to know your history, especially in the second half as it fast-tracks events near the end of the war and following. I definitely did not care for the soft-focus photography. It was so overdone and made it seem like we were viewing the past through an indulgent haze. But Peck gave a worthy performance, and the iconic moments were there. I liked Marge Doucet's subtle performance as his wife, and a couple scenes were quite moving, especially the one with the survivors of the Death March. Movie number 5 is one my mom and I just randomly caught on TV, 1966's 1 Million Years B.C. This adventure film, directed by Don Chaffee, imagines what early life on the planet might have been like. In a nutshell, pretty awful, with endless conflict. Man versus man, man versus beast, man versus his environment. There's so much packed in here. Savage fighting, primitive courtship, sudden dinosaur attacks, nasty monkey men, epic eruptions, crazy rituals. You know when people say, I just think that I was born in the wrong time. I wish I could go back and live in a previous era. They're not talking about this one. This version of 1 Million Years B.C., it is a remake, is a popular cult classic, especially with a certain demographic. It's the film that made Raquel Welch an icon, and it's got special effects by Ray Harryhausen, so of course there's some great stop-motion creature work and visual trickery. The only time I thought it didn't look good is when they used a real animal, especially in the iguana scene. There's an obvious clash with the rest of the image, and I would rather they just used stop motion for everything. It's a pretty entertaining movie for how simple it is. The story pulls you in, even with a bare minimum of dialogue, and there's a lot you can have fun with. The hair is fascinating. Some people have hideous rat's nests, while others have fluffy blow-dried dews, and everyone has such healthy, pristine teeth. Who knew dental hygiene back then was so good? Movie number 6 is a viewer recommendation, one that many people have asked about and suggested over the years, 1947's Odd Man Out. Directed by Carol Reed and set in Northern Ireland, it stars James Mason as a leader in the Irish resistance who has been hiding out with friends after escaping from prison. He emerges at last to lead a robbery, but when things go wrong and he gets shot, he's left behind to evade the police with a serious injury. I was aware of this being a man-on-the-run film, but I didn't know it would go so far beyond that. Mason is the conflicted and increasingly desperate protagonist, but this is also a dramatic ensemble piece spotlighting the individuals whose lives intersect with his throughout this fateful ordeal. Significant supporting roles are played by Kathleen Ryan, W.G. Fay, F.J. McCormick, Robert Newton, and Dennis O'Day, among many others. The cinematic excellence on display here helped put Carol Reed on the map as a noir director. Included are a number of elements that would show up in subsequent films, like Dutch angles, wet streets at night, noisy little boys, shifty characters offering their services, determined but not unkind policemen, moral ambiguity. The film makes it clear from the very beginning that the focus is not on law and the crime itself, but rather on the responses of the people who find themselves getting involved. Thus, it makes itself amenable to all audiences, no matter where their sympathies lie, whether they find the criminal activity justifiable or not. That's not really the point, although the political angle is there, guilt and innocence are part of the discussion. It's a tragic film, not just for the main character, whose delirium intensifies as he searches for a safe haven in despair, but for all who get roped in, willingly or not. One thing I particularly liked is what was done with the weather. It's bad enough to be on the run with blood leaking from your arm on a mild day. It's much worse to be dragging your bones through fog and a cold, driving rain that changes over to snow. The weather was a great inclusion here, for atmosphere, for realism, for visual interest, and for driving home just how grim this situation is. Movie number 7 is 1998's The Faculty, a self-aware reimagining of Invasion of the Body Snatchers directed by Robert Rodriguez and set in a rowdy high school where a mismatched group of students grows suspicious of their teacher's strange behavior. This emphatically 90s film boasts quite the cast, including some future stars on their way up. You've got Elijah Wood, Josh Hartnett, Usher, and The Faculty includes Robert Patrick, Selma Hayek, Jon Stewart, Famke Janssen, Piper Laurie, and Bebe Neuwirth. It's kind of good, kind of cringy, kind of dumb. It basically goes up and down from scene to scene. Take into consideration that I have never been keen on teen movies, especially ones that revolve around awful high school life. But it was kind of fun, and it was interesting to see how stereotypes were defied and atypical matches were made. Greg Nicotero was involved with this project, and some of the effects and makeup hold up nicely. Some of the visuals are dated and cheesy, but others are still decent. So, yeah, I'm a little all over the place with this one. Movie number 8 is 2023's Plane. When a New Year's Eve flight across the Pacific gets struck by lightning, pilot Gerard Butler has to pull off an emergency landing on a remote island, unaware it's in extremely hostile territory. I saw the ad for this when it came out earlier this year, and I thought, I'd watch that, and I thought it was pretty good. Maybe I was predisposed to like it, but I thought it was very tense, with a good story, good conflict, good character stuff. Butler proves himself once again to be a likable action star. He gets to be Scottish in this movie, and his Scottish charm doesn't overpower the film. His character is fit and capable of doing fight scenes, but not absurdly indestructible. Mike Colter co-stars as a passenger in handcuffs who's being extradited for homicide. He and Butler have to team up, which adds another layer to things. I liked their dynamic, and all told, this was both a decent plane disaster movie and a decent good guys versus bad guys shoot-'em-up. So I was pleased. Movie number 9 is 1960's The Leech Woman. Rarely do I go into a film cold without knowing a thing about it, but this was one of those instances. YouTube recommended this to my mom, and she wanted to watch it with me, so with nothing but a title and a thumbnail to go on, we decided to check it out. Maybe that's how most people watch movies, I don't know, that's not typically what I do. It wasn't quite what we guessed it would be. We were thinking something like The Wasp Woman meets Attack of the Giant Leeches. It didn't go in the creature feature direction. It was actually a spooky morality tale about age, beauty, and greed, where a doctor is approached by a remarkably old African woman who claims to know the secret of rejuvenation. He then drags his miserable alcoholic wife along on a jungle adventure to find a plant that can make her young and hot again. It's got a slow start. The opening is just a prolonged argument between the bitter couple, with him constantly belittling her for her drinking. And then the safari scenes are cheap, with numerous cutaways to old stock footage that might have been pilfered from an old Tarzan movie. But shortly after that, it becomes more exciting and creative, and the result is a dark, ruthless story with some fun twists. Colleen Gray stars under heavy makeup, and she does quite well alongside Philip Terry and Grant Williams. Not bad for a movie I never heard of and didn't have on my radar. Movie number 10 is a viewer recommendation, 1970s And Soon the Darkness, a slow-burn British thriller directed by Robert Quest, in which two young nurses on holiday are cycling together through France. They have a spat and part ways, but when the one girl goes back looking for her friend, she's disappeared. She begins searching for her, trying in vain to get help from the mysterious locals, but is she on the lookout for a missing person or a murder victim? There are many glowing reviews on IMDb that call this film creepy, haunting, shocking, Hitchcockian, but I was underwhelmed. It starts out fine, and the very nature of the scenario is disturbing, so there's little the film needs to do to make it scary, but I felt it didn't deliver on most of its promises. I don't agree with the common complaint in negative reviews that it was boring. I didn't have an issue with the pace, although it did become repetitive. My biggest problem was the shameless manipulation. It relies heavily on red herrings and ham-fisted misdirection to generate tension. It tries to trick the viewer with music cues and photography, and that just didn't work for me. Everybody acts weird, but not in a way I found intriguing, and the script is so bent on obfuscating the plot that it forces characters to behave and speak illogically, and I found that maddening. The climax was dull and overcooked, and there was nothing surprising about the so-called twist. This just didn't do it for me. Now, this was a viewer recommendation, and I would just like to say something that I've wanted to say for quite a while. I hope you all understand that when I review a recommendation and my response is less than positive, I don't mean that to reflect on the individual who recommended that film. There are no hard feelings on my end, and I hope that there are none on yours. I would love to be able to say every time, a viewer recommended this and I loved it, and make everybody happy, but that wouldn't be honest, and I don't think you're here for dishonest reviews, are you? So if ever I watch a movie that you recommended and I don't love it, or I don't even like it, please forgive me and please understand that I'm not suddenly thinking, wow, this person recommended that movie and I hated it, and I'm never going to take their recommendations again, and I think that they're out of their minds. It's not like that. You know, all of you who make recommendations, I have to give you props for bravery. I don't go around making recommendations to people. Well, I suppose in a way I do. I have a channel where I review movies, and I often will say at the end, I encourage you to check this movie out, but in my real life, in personal life, I am very reluctant to make recommendations. I do it very carefully. I try to take the person's interests and personalities into consideration, and I think about all different facets of the movie, and more often than not, I will probably decide not to recommend the film just because I don't want to take the chance that they might watch it and then dislike it, and then they're in an awkward situation where they're like, ooh, she told me to watch this movie and I did, and I didn't like it, and I can't imagine why she likes it. So I just avoid the whole thing. Those of you who don't have an issue with that and just go ahead and say, hey, check this out, I admire that. So, well, that was a long-winded tangent. All that to say, it's not don't take it personally at all if I watch a movie you recommend and it doesn't do it for me, which unfortunately is the case with And Soon the Darkness. I found it pretty irritating. Sorry. And movie number 11 is 2011's Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which is the fourth entry in the film series and the first directed by Brad Bird, who I believe directed all the rest. I'll probably refer to this from now on as the one with the Burj Khalifa. Maybe other people do that as well. This is the one where Tom Cruise does that insane stunt. It's actually two insane stunts. I don't know which one was more dangerous, but I think the second one where he goes down the building is even wilder. That was the one that made me feel like, whoa! And I know that my mom felt sick through the entire thing. She did not like this part of the movie at all. The other distinguishing feature is that this is the one that co-stars Jeremy Renner. I'll probably never see him in a movie again and not think about his accident, although he's made an almost miraculous recovery and turned out to be a really inspiring figure. I hope that he's doing as well as he seems to be. Anyway, he's good here, his character adds a lot, and the whole team has fun chemistry. This plot follows the last one nicely. There is a big jump, and a lot has changed, but I like what they did to tie the two movies together, rather than saying, oh, hang that one, we want to do our own independent story, so just pretend it didn't happen. It's cohesive, and I like the increased emphasis on the group effort, with the members of the team pulling their weight and then some, even when they're at odds with each other. Michael Giacchino does a good job with the score again, and again, I'm amazed by some of the tech and gadgetry they came up with. I don't know if any of this stuff exists. If it does, that's incredible. Overall, I really enjoyed this one. It has a fine balance of tension, action, character development, and humor. The only thing is, it's so stimulating, but also so long, that by the end, my eyes were bothering me and I had a headache. But is that the movie's fault, or mine for not blinking enough? And that's what else I saw in June. I hope you enjoyed this video. As usual, there's a list of the films I talked about and how I watched them in the description. Let me know your thoughts on any of these movies, or your thoughts on anything that you saw last month in the comments below, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.